Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. We will give everyone a couple of minutes to roll in here. We've got lots of participants today, so we'll start in a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
And we have lots of prompt people, so I think we'll only need to wait for a minute.
You act like that's a surprise. What kind of ship are you
Maybe.
running over there, you guys?
Okay, well, let me go ahead with the introductions, and by the time everybody's in here, we'll be into the good stuff. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome. And I want to let you know that today's webinar is brought to you by the Roybal Center for Promoting Adherence to Behavior Change and Enhancing Cognitive Function, also fondly referred to as the Michigan Roybal Center. It's less of a mouthful. So, my name's Ann Maringer. I'm the Michigan Roybal Center manager. And this webinar is part of a regular series of lectures and learning opportunities that we host every other month. So if you'd like to stay informed of upcoming webinars and other center news, I will be putting a link in the chat a little further on in the process. And we got a raised hand here. But that way you can sign up for our newsletter and stay informed of all the upcoming webinars. So the mission of the Roybal Center is to translate basic discoveries about motivation and behavior change into scalable and potent interventions. Our work bridges science and everyday life by creating accessible, individualized interventions for brain and body health. By harnessing new technology and building a strong scientific community, of which you all are now a part of, we aim to help people move more, remember more, and thrive as they age. So we're proud to be a part of the network of Roybal Centers, which is generously supported by the National Institute on Aging. I will also put a link in the chat if you'd like to learn more about the Roybal Center network or the coordinating center. But today, I want to introduce, we are delighted and honored to have Dr. Amanda Rebar with us. She is an associate professor in the Department of Health Promotion, Education, and Behavior and director of the Motivation of Health Behavior Lab at the Arnold School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina. Her research sits at the intersection of psychology, public health, and biostatistics, examining dual process models of behavior change to understand why people do what they shouldn't do and don't do what they should. With extensive expertise in habit formation, motivation, and real-world time series methodology, her work bridges psychological insights with community-focused research to inform effective health policies and interventions. So today, Dr. Rebar will be presenting her talk, Habit Formation Without the Hype. Her work, separating habit misconceptions from real-world evidence, deeply connects to our mission at the Michigan Roybal Center. By examining how cues, impulses, motivation, and environmental contexts interact, Dr. Rebar's research offers essential insights into how we can design more effective, scalable behavior change strategies that support brain and body health across the lifespan. So I am going to stop sharing so Dr. Rebar can get her slides up, and I will also cover a few logistics for questions. Please ask them throughout the seminar as they come up. You'll need to use that little more button at the bottom of your screen, the little dot, 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 and then you can get into the Q&A and leave your questions there. I'll be monitoring the Q&A thing, and we'll ask questions as we go. But without further ado, Amanda.
Great, thank you. This is a fantastic opportunity, and I really appreciate it. It's a wonderful center, and I'm really excited to hear what this crowd thinks about the stuff I'm going to talk about. So, what I've been diving quite deep into habit research and looking at it, and part of the reason is because I love thinking about dynamics in terms of like what drives our behavior and how it changes over time. And I love motivation and the mechanism. So I'm really interested in what drives someone to do what they do or don't do what they should. And habit is a beautiful combination of those things because it's one of the only theories that we have that started to talk about dynamics as it went. So we're talking about how habits form over time. So kind of intrinsically, even in the early 20th century, we were talking about dynamics when we think about habits. So it's kind of my favorite thing in the world. So what you're in for today is a talk about habits and just shifting my screen a bit. There we go. So the structure I'm going to do, I think it's important when someone's talking to you to kind of understand who they are and where they're coming from. And in the last year or so, it's been really important to me to make sure that people understand what my values are and where I'm coming from that perspective as well. So I'll briefly touch on that. Then I'm going to talk about what habits are. And you think that would take like 45 seconds. It won't. But I'll try to make it as condensed as I can because that's actually quite an intense topic and can be thought of in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different perspectives. So we'll talk a bit about the conceptualization of habit and where that comes from. And we're going to get into those, how do habits form? So how do we actually help people make healthy habits and disrupt some of their unhealthy habits? And then something that has stood out to me and my colleagues that are working on habit is that a lot of times when people learn about habit, because they love it like we do, they think it's a catch-all, it's a rescue for everything, and the answer for every impulse on behavior and every solution to long-term behavior change. And we just want to remind people it's not. It's one of many influences on our behavior. So I'm just going to kind of set some boundaries on what we can expect based on some of the evidence we have. I am going to introduce evidence throughout this talk, but if people want to dive deeper on something or have more specific questions about what I'm presenting, please do stick it in the Q&A and Ann will stop me and help me get through that. So please don't hesitate to do that. Okay. As anything, this is not my work. This is the a combination of a history and of a lot of people. I am really lucky because this field is full of amazing, smart, and wonderful people to be around. So a lot of these ideas and the evidence I'm talking about is the combination of those. On the top of this screen, that's kind of my history. So I grew up in Lehi, Utah, and that's me up on one of the mountains as a pioneer, and then graduated and went to Indiana University. And my first exposure to research was in John Bates Social Emotional Developmental Lab. So we had toddlers in lab. We did delay of gratification tasks, and we did a lot of emotion regulation and teasing out how emotions at that age and the regulation go on to impact things later in life. And as an undergrad, I didn't realize how neat the data was that I had access to. But they had data from the 1980s of people when they were 6 months old. And then we continued to follow them for 30 years later and had outcomes like criminal history and salary earned and relationship. So I had the opportunity to fall in love with the idea that something as feels inconsequential as where you're looking in a lab can have long-term impacts on outcomes later in life. So started to fall in love with the simple fact that numbers can help you understand something as complicated as human behavior and motivation was great. Then David might recognize some of those pictures. That middle one, I went through some wild haircuts in grad school, but that was I went to Penn State and worked with David Conroy. I did a master's where we focused on achievement motivation and then shifted gears a bit for the PhD and looked at physical activity motivation. And something we fell in love with there is the idea that a lot of the way we intervene with physical activity relies on the fact that if we can persuade people about how important it is to be physically active, then they'll do it. But that's tends to not be what drives most of our day-to-day behavior. So starting to think about some of these processes that aren't as reliant on self-control, I love that idea. And starting to map on some of this emotions and early motivational processes into how that impacts health behavior motivation with physical activity. I think that's great. I love that and just fell in love with it and I've been doing it ever since. After graduating Penn State, I got what I thought was going to be a 3-year postdoc in Australia and ended up staying there for 11 years. So just came back to the US 2 years ago now. So I'm at University of South Carolina. That's the view off my log cabin porch. But in Australia, did a lot in public health and focusing on intervention development and evaluation. And here, back in the School of Public Health, surrounded by colleagues that do much more global population level health and being able to connect that with the individual and micro time scales that I love has been really fun and a shift in perspective that is greatly needed. So that's who I am. Quick perspective on my values. So just became co-editor in chief of PSE year ago. Time is a blur. But with that, it's been quite interesting to have a perspective on the field in terms of where submissions are coming from, who our reviewers are, and who the leaders are in the field versus who the readership is and who some of the authors are. And there's a distinction in a lot of things like gender breakdown and ethnic diversity. And we're quite interested in that and understanding that and starting to change the landscape of to make sure that the leadership in the field mirrors the actual audience and the part of it. So I've been working quite hard on making sure that we're giving voice to people who deserve it and don't have it at the moment. Another thing is AI. I'm sure we're all battling that in our own ways, regardless of what positions you're in. And it's just a reminder, one of the values I'm focusing on now is making sure we slow down and do quality work because the concern is the benefits that AI has provided in terms of productivity and how fast we can do things I'm not seeing it change the advancement of science. Um, there's a lot of more science, but is it actually advancing into more knowledge? I'm not seeing that quite yet. So that's one of the values I'm focusing on. Efficiency is another, making sure we're that juggling of doing things quickly but really well and really rigorously, including peer review. So everyone reminder to please do your reviews as part of the process. Unity kind of touches on what I've talked about earlier, making sure we're having a broader global perspective in science, and then resilience, making sure that as a group, we're valuing each other and making sure that we're being resilient and being persistent and staying by our values. Okay, now let's get into the fun stuff. So, what are habits? Should be an easy question. So, I find it quite interesting that in the field of exercise and sports psychology, there tends to be a leaning that we start thinking of every motivational process as an achievement. It's what we call it goal directed, the idea that you set an intention or you make a goal and then you work really hard until you achieve the goal. And when you take a historical perspective on our field, that actually makes a lot of sense because a lot of the theories that we use to explain people's exercise behavior originated in other fields, mostly sport and performance psychology. But there's also organizational psychology and social psychology where we're borrowing theories from much more goal achievement-based processes than our day-to-day lives. And a lot of them don't necessarily align. So trying to be the best at something is not the same motivational process as trying to do something day in and day out. And other fields have caught on to that quite quickly or even started that way. Whereas I think physical activity psychology is shifting more that way now, but is having a hard time not being sports psychologists, not being the performance driven. How do we make them the best? And I think I see that a lot in the field of we're still trying to be performance and achievement driven, when if you're looking at long-term outcomes of activity or behavior, that may not be the same motivational process. And habit is definitely not an achievement process because the way me and Ben Gardner and a few others start to define it is that it's you do something out of habit, you don't have habits. So habit is one of many influences on your behavior. You don't have behaviors that are habits. And that's really important from a behavior change perspective because it means it's not a definite. It's not that it gives you a sense of autonomy that if you have a habit, it's not necessary that you do the habitual behavior. There's stuff that happens in between that you can actually have some power to dictate and change. So by thinking about habit as one of a whole bunch of influences on your behavior, it gives us flexibility to target that in interventions. So it's a process. The idea is it comes from early behavioral psychology, operant conditioning, the idea and associative learning, but it's the idea that if you do something in the same context over and over again, your mind makes these mental shortcuts where they say, oh, if I'm in this situation, then I do this. And it gives you this boost, this approach tendency or impulse to act in those situations. And our brain has evolved to do this so that we're not constantly relying on cognitive resources that can be quite draining to make decisions of what's next. So most people tend to go through their day without consciously weighing the pros and cons of every behavioral choice. Like even right now, if we all think, what are all the things I could be doing now? There's many options and they all have good and bad things about them, but we're just doing what we're doing. And is it one reason could be because of these learned behaviors we have. When I'm in this context or when I'm triggered by this cue, I do this thing. I joke that this is kind of where the advancement of my coding skills is. I love a good if-then statement, right? If this situation, then that. And that's what our brain has done, is made these quick if-then action plan type statements that start building over time just to give us a nudge that gets us out of our resource heavy cognition and goes, oh, just do this unless you're going to have the resources to kick yourself out of this automatic process. So this is a very dual process framework type of perspective. The idea that this is an automatic influence, and all that means is that urge to do the behavior that you feel when you are in that, or you're triggered by that cue, or you're in that context, that is spontaneous and unintentional. It doesn't mean you don't have control over your behavior or your context. And it doesn't mean that if you have enough motivation and self-control, you can inhibit it. What it means is that urge, that feeling you get, that's what's automatic. Okay. And importantly, habit is learned as well. So it's over time. You're not born with a habit. Something has to happen where you have repetitions of that behavior with those cues that strengthen that mental connection. Okay. So my joke is me and Ben Gardner write a lot of habit papers together. And and as you do in the field, you kind of write the same paragraph, intro paragraph, right? Here's the importance of what we study. And ours is here's the important habit. And one of the arguments is how prevalent habitual behaviors tend to be in our lives. So a lot of public health interventions focus on intervening with intentional or goal-driven processes. But if we actually look at why people are doing what they do, it tends to be out of habit. And it was a bugbear of mine that one of the citations that we would use to say this was a study that actually never even measured habit, and it didn't even measure things over time. It was kind of a daily diary of when you do this behavior, are you in the same location? And we continue to cite this in our own work, saying most of what we do is habitual, but that we knew that study didn't actually probably answer the question as well as we could. So we designed a study to answer that. Basically took people in the UK and Australia and said, prompted them throughout I can't remember, 1 or 2 weeks, and 6 times a day, and just said, what are you doing right now? And let them open response to say what they were doing, and then just said, how habitual is it? How intentional is it? And trying just to get a general idea of how habitual is our day-to-day pattern typically. And looked at this, of course, we looked at moderators and different ways to look at it. But the general takeaway I want you to know about is that, yeah, most of our behavior tends to be out of habit. And you can reflect on this or even think about it going forward. How often do you actually stop and think about some of the behavioral choices you have and weigh the pros and cons, or having to talk yourself into doing something? It's not very often. This slide also brings up another point that I want to make sure I hit on. And it's the idea that sometimes, especially when we talk about physical activity habits or exercise habits, people get quite argumentative because they think No, there's no way I'm going to the gym and exercising and it's automatic. Like I'm not on autopilot when I'm lifting weights. It's hard. And that's something that is intrinsic about activity is it is by nature effortful, physically effortful. And an important distinction we want to make is when we talk about how often someone is physically active, we're talking about what we call, well, what I would have named it differently, but it was before I met then. It's habitual initiation. So the decision, quote unquote, to do the behavior that, okay, I'm going to do this activity. That's what's habitual, and that's what we tend to focus on with habit-based work. In this context, I'm going to be active. And then there's other habit processes that can kick in for how you do the behavior. So habit initiation is the decision to do the behavior is out of habit. So that I have an impulse to be like, oh, this is when I'm active. How you do that, the execution of that behavior, that's a habitual execution or skill. I'm arguing with some sports psychologists at the moment is the difference between having a habit for the way you do something versus skill acquisition. But it's basically chunking of the steps of an activity, right? So you can have a habit for how you exercise or that you exercise or both. And that's what we found out of this is across behaviors, regardless of what activity they were doing, it tended to be out of habit to do the behavior. And even more so, the way they did it was automatic. So now we can cite ourselves in our first paragraph. Um, so this is something we've been working on um, quite intensely, and it's breaking out what is a habit into really specified components, because that's really important for some of the work we're doing when we can get really precise with the way we intervene and understand the influence of habit on behavior. So this is work we're doing where we go, you have a cue, so something's activating this whole system that triggers this underlying association between a cue and a behavior. That activation of that underlying association results in this impulse to act, that urge to do something, and that may or may not lead to habitual behavior, the enactment of the behavior. So it's an important distinction of what the habit is and what the behavioral outcome is. And it's hard to do lit reviews on habit when we use the term habit to typically just describe stable behavior, something we do a lot. So a lot of diet research refers to dietary habits or even hygiene habits, like oral hygiene habits, something like that. When really what we think they're talking about is stable behavior. And when we talk about habit associations or that process, we're talking about the influence that is a determinant of behavior, and the habitual behavior is the outcome of a habit. So you have the influence and the behavior. And by having the predictors and the outcome, then you can start to really use our amazing scientific method to start drilling into different components of this so we can understand what is changeable, how many options do we have to work with changing our behavior, and how do we do that? So then we can start process mapping that onto behavior change techniques and interventions. So those are important. Something I wanted to touch on quite early is this, and I got permission to talk about this, even though I think this manuscript is still sitting in my inbox because I have to run one more descriptive for the team. But this is data from the UK. They have a water crisis there. So they are looking into water usage, and they have been using monitors to track when people take showers. So they have apartments on university campus apartments and dorms, and they just are tracking when does the water in the shower turn on and for how long. And they're working with some interventions, but what we were interested in is looking at routines in this. So how predictable is it the time people take showers? And if you notice something about that team of authors, they're all men. So here I roll in, and I like a good give me your data and I'll do that and you guys make the narrative. But I had to chime in here because when they started talking about this, they talked about people tend to have that seem plausible. And I'm going, yeah, but is it a hair day? Are you shaving that day? Is it a morning shower or a night shower? Are you cold? And I was seeing it so much more nuanced, whereas Ben's going, I mean, you shower to get clean, to fun. And I was like, no, it's much more than that. But what we fell upon here was an interesting finding when I had this continuous time series data, in that when I looked at just a person's distribution of when they showered, it tended to only explain about 30% of a person's time of shower. So just by based on what time of day it is, I wasn't very good at predicting when that person would shower. So your average and your distribution couldn't really say, if I know what time you shower today, I'll know what time you shower tomorrow. However, when we took into account that people might have multiple routines for showering, like I might have a hair day shower and a non-hair day shower, or a morning routine and an evening routine, when you can account for multimodality of this data, I didn't, the data explained so much that I couldn't even put in other predictors because so much of the person's variability and when they took a shower was explained by these predictable routines in a person's life. So that plot on on the side of the screen says that about more than half of the sample here tended to have two routines for showers because one was morning and one was afternoon. There's some that had more routines, and remember, these are university students, so you've got those that are getting home after a late night out and showering then. And then you had people that did tend to have one kind of time that they showered. And it wasn't actually, most people weren't having a shower at 3 p.m., but that's what happens when you try to average across people who have different times that they shower. But why I keep putting this in talks when I talk about habit is because we think of habit as predicting behavior, when really what we need to think about is habits predicting behavior, especially when we're looking at something like physical activity. Physical activity is something to researchers, but when you take it to a precise individual level, people think of their own activity, right? So you might have a habit for running, or you might have a habit for walking the dog. When we try to aggregate all of your physical activity using minutes of MVPA or energy expenditure, what we might be doing is taking the consequences of several habits as well as all the other things that are influencing a person's activity. So when we start intervening at the habit level or trying to understand habit, we have to remember that you can have multiple habits for the same behavior. For example, someone might have a habit to go on a walk before they have a coffee in the morning, and they might have a habit to go on a walk after eating dinner. And it's the same behavior, but two distinct habits who can have two distinct influences on the same behavioral outcome. So that can be tricky to study and to operationalize, but I think we have to remember that. And also, it makes me want to go back to all my longitudinal data sets and check for multimodality because I haven't. So I'm really excited about this, just as a reminder that the same behavior can be driven by more than one habit. And this has important implications. I get carried away with how long I talk. Okay. So it's weird because I'm just talking. I can't even see you guys. So I'm just talking to myself on slides right now. Anyway, so this has important context for when we're trying to disrupt habitual behavior. A lot of what we talk about is forming new habits, but what we're learning about habits and the influence it has on behavior is really important for disrupting some of what the ongoing habits that we're trying to change or replace. And this is why we think it's really important that we spend a lot of time being precise and clear about what we mean by what is a habit. Because the more we know about the elements of it, the more options it gives us to disrupt it. So this is a neat paper in Appetite that Ben Gardner's led. I think it has like 9 studies in it or something wild. But basically, the takeaway of it is there are several ways that you can disrupt habits. So just trying to focus on one of them is limiting the amount of tools we have to change our behavior. We talk about reducing, I'll start at the cue end. We talk about reducing simply by just avoiding the cue that's triggering that impulse to act. So they do this in a lot of substance use treatment programs. Don't be around the same people when you are using substances, or drive a different way home that doesn't go by your favorite pub. That we call that habit cue discontinuity. The idea that if you just aren't triggered by the cue, then you don't have to rely on self-control to avoid that temptation that habits can lead to. Habit substitution is an effective approach because it's further down the chain, and it talks about you can rely on the cue, but if you start replacing the behavior, then you can start switching that underlying association that's driving that impulse to act. There's a lot of nuance to that. It has to, in general, if you're looking to substitute something that's a habit, you need it to have the same rewarding characteristics as the behavior you're doing. So you're not going to stop smoking by eating a celery stick. You need to find out what is a need that is linked to the reward of the behavior and find something that is healthier or that you're happier with that does that same thing, and start substituting that in the context that you do that behavior. And other opportunities, and these are where most of our interventions focus on, I would argue, is that you let the habit impulse happen, but you use self-control to just fight it. So you make the behavior harder. So you add friction to accessibility of the behavior. So smoking regulations, or you simply use self-control to just not give in to that temptation. Not surprisingly, those don't last over the long term. So when we start focusing on using what we know about habit to interrupt habitual behavior, we focus more on the starting process of that. If you use the cue focus or the habit substitution where you're looking at that underlying association, conceptually that should make more sense to lead to longer term and better outcomes for a person. But I find it quite refreshing and rewarding that it's not just about you made the wrong decision. There's so many different avenues for changing your behavior. Your behavior in any situation is the interaction of you and that context. So just beating yourself up for making a bad choice isn't helping. It's just data. If you fail, you need to understand what's going on around me and what's happening within me that I can change so that next time I can succeed. It's data. It's not a mark of giving up. Okay, see, I told you defining a habit. We may not even get past defining a habit in this talk. Okay, so we're driving a bit deeper. I'm just going to lightly touch on each of these. What do I mean by a cue? Because as I mentioned to David earlier, I was in a workshop this morning where we almost spent 4 hours just answering this one question. We didn't even answer it. But I just wanted to quickly kind of touch on each of these aspects. Um, when we think about a cue, we tend to give examples that are easy to understand. So a time of day or a being around a certain person or a part in your routine. But there can be a lot of different things that can act as a cue that triggers our habit impulse. And what we're starting to understand is probably it's not one cue. It's probably just the activation of an underlying association of cues. I joke, and Jackie Mars dubbed the term a vibe. So it's not a cue, it's a vibe. It's a the feeling of being in the context that has whatever the triggering cue or cues are. So we're starting to do some interesting work in terms of some people might be driven by one cue. Some people might have to have multiple cues to for that habit to be triggered. So what do we mean by cue? It's very complicated. We don't know. But what we do know is it's different for every people or every person. So if you're forcing someone to use time of day as a habit trigger, it's not probably going to work for everyone. So we're digging into that and would love some thoughts on that from everybody. I'll skip that. And also, if you're interested in more of that, Jerry Rusin is a legend in this area and is doing some really exciting work. So please do get in touch with me and I can get you in touch with her or just look up her work. Okay, and the other thing I wanted to touch on in this part of the presentation was what is an impulse and why does it matter? So I'm not even going to jump into the equations here, but we get a lot of pushback in this part of the definition, in that if it's automatic, does there have to be a mechanism of action between the stimulus and the response? So between the cue and the behavior, can't it just be a direct pathway? Why do we keep pushing this idea of this impulse or this approach tendency happens? But it's really important from a practical standpoint and from a precision and operational standpoint. Because if you have this internal mental state, it means you have something to focus on when we start intervening over time. So if you're doing, just-in-time adaptive interventions and precise medicine, where you can get really idiosyncratic and dynamic with a person, then you can go, we can intervene with something tangible between the cue and the behavior. That's that the activation of that underlying cue behavior association and the feeling it gives you that makes you tend to do that behavior, or at least have an impulse to do that behavior. So when that yeah, we just got published, this paper came out where we talk about this from a neuropsychological perspective and kind of debate about, can we actually capture this? Because it would be really neat if we could actually have a physiological or a EEG or a neuroscience measure of what this impulse is. The answer is no, unfortunately, with the technology we have. But we're starting to get that idea that it's important to understand that there's something between that. Is it actually operationalizable? That's still unknown. Okay, and do we have any questions before we jump into habit formation? How we doing?
No questions yet, except
Oh,
people who had to leave and said, "This is fascinating. Please send me the recording." So
oh, great.
we will
I love a
send the
little
recording to everybody.
validation break. That's great. Thanks, Anne. Okay. So, great. So I told you, I warned you, we were going to define habits in a really long-winded way. So now we're going to jump into how do they form? And this is really a fun part because you actually can't tease out what a habit is without already hinting at the idea that they form and shift over time. And also, this is really fun because it seems so straightforward to explain. And then when you start really thinking about it, it gets really complicated really quickly. So we're going to see how we go on this. But in general, when you think about doing anything, you have the initial motion if you're doing it from a goal-directed standpoint. So if someone wants to start a physical activity habit, they have this initial motivation. So it could be a New Year's resolution. They're going to do the behavior. Then they form an intention, and then all you have to do is do the behavior. What's the big deal? But conceptually, it's okay, then a cue is experienced or you're in a context and you do the behavior. And sometimes self-regulation kicks in, especially if it's a new goal that you're trying to focus on and monitor your behavior and make sure that you're doing something that is in line with your goals. So self-regulation will kick in. So that's great. That's doing a behavior. That's a single behavioral choice. All you need to do to form a habit is just do that over and over again. What's the big deal? But this part where you go from making a single behavioral choice to doing that over and over and over and over again, that's where it gets really fun from a statistical standpoint, but really hard from a practical standpoint. Because if you're just relying on self-regulation, it's not a very reliable way to maintain behavior long term. So we're looking at ways to help people battle through the first part of changing your behavior because that's really hard because it requires a lot of self-control and self-regulation until some of those automatic processes can kick in to help you make the choices that you want to make without you having to talk yourself into it. And importantly, again, I lose a lot of people with this part of the argument because what I am not saying is that the more you're active, the easier it will be to be physically active. That may be true, but that's a physiological and fitness question. What I'm trying to argue is that the more you make the choice to be active with the same cue, the easier it will be to talk yourself into doing the activity. It's always going to be hard because it's effortful. But sometimes when you are make the choice to be active, you don't have to talk yourself into it as much, and you don't have to try to, you're not having these internal battles of thinking, oh, but else I could also do this. What are the benefits of that? Oh, how would I actually do this? A lot of that mental struggle can be reduced the more you do this with a reliable cue that can help trigger those internal processes. Okay, so from an intervention standpoint, all this means is that when a person starts forming a habit, we call this the habit formation curve. And all it means, and I also like it because it's symbolic, because it's a hill and like changing your behavior is a uphill battle. It's great. But really what this data is from is the behavioral automaticity index. So it's how automatic it is to make that choice or to initiate the behavior that you're forming a habit for. And the more that you do that, the stronger your habit will become. And then your habit kicks in. So you're automatic, and people tend to hit a plateau where it won't become more automatic regardless of how much they do it. So what we're arguing from an intervention standpoint is when your habit's forming, it's very reliant on self-regulation. So you need different intervention components than you do when your habit is formed. So we're working on a lot of interventions where we're tracking people's habit trajectories and shifting the content we give them based on where they are in their trajectory. Because what you don't need is if you've been doing physical activity for 6 months, you probably don't need to be reminded that physical activity is good for you, right? We need to start shifting from some of these initial motivational processes to some of these boosters and things that we know are more predictive of maintenance and problem solving and cue consistency. But we rarely shift our intervention content based on something as psychological as habit. If we do shift it, we tend to just make choices about this week they get this module, this week they get next, or rely on time. First 6 months you get this, second you get this, and that's not how our brains work. Okay, so thanks to David, I was visiting Penn State, and when was it? Probably a few years ago. And he introduced me to computational models. And I have not thought of anything since because it's some of my favorite things. It's equations and it's algorithms and it's precision and clarity. And I love all of those things. And it's really useful for some of my approaches. So I just want to quickly mention that and give that citation because what computational models do is really important for our field and for psychology in general. Because what it makes us do is be really precise with the theories that we tend to just use words and boxes and arrows for. And it helps us predict how we think things will change and under what conditions. And importantly, also, it allows us to have a theory-based approach to some of these more dynamic interventions that advancements in technology are allowing us to do. We're in a weird part of our field's history because a lot of the theories that we rely on are static and relying on one behavioral choice. But our intervention technology is evolving in a way that allows us to intervene in a dynamic process in real time. So what it means is we need to have theories that are also dynamic and that are clear in the predictions of what changes under what conditions for who. So, when I was visiting Penn State, me and David and Constantino were whiteboarding, one of my favorite things to do, about can we put a computational model of habit together? And obviously, I love habit, and David knows habit theory. So we were talking, and the engineer was writing the equation as we went. And basically the takeaway is if you're being physically active from a habit perspective, all you need to do is make a decision over and over again with the same cue or in that same context. How hard is that? And we thought, I'm going to skip this part. So, so this is not our handwriting, but but it's the idea, and this is the actual computational model we came up with. I'm not going to walk you through it. I'll talk about what it is. But I will never forget when me and David were like, "We've got it. We're geniuses. We're going to change the field." And Constantino looks me in the eye and goes, "This is a simple probability equation that I teach my intro econ class or my intro engineering students." I was like, well, that's very humbling, Constantino. Thank you. But what it made us do was think about conditions and situations and interactions between variables in our theory that have, well, that at least we had never thought about before. So what happens in this circumstance? How does this variable relate to this variable? And we're quite clever when we use words because we can just have unsaid assumptions or we can just blur over um, certain conditions because we don't want to talk about it. But when you're forcing an algorithm to predict something, it tends to make those unknown or unsaid parts of the theory quite clear. And then you either have to decide or point to a clear gap in the literature. So there's my plug for that. The takeaway of this computational model is that to make a habit, you need to do the same behavior in the same context. So all that equation was saying in a convoluted way was that when you're in that target context, which has that cue that triggers your behavior, if you do that behavior that you want to become a habit, the more often you do that, the stronger the probability that you'll form a habit that will help you do that behavior more often in the future. Whereas if you do something else in that context, it's going to weaken that underlying cue behavior association that helps give you that impulse that prompts behavior in the future. Again, sounds so simple. So all you need to do is do the same behavior in the same context over and over and over and over again. And just to touch on some, we're starting to chip away at some of this practical implications of this. But the idea is to form a habit, to have an intervention that helps people form, you need to start pushing them towards doing that behavior, but that's going to be harder and shift when it shifts into self-control, it's going to be more difficult cognitively than it will when their habit is stronger. So we need interventions that adapt to that so that we're helping support that underlying process of repetitions of cue behavior pairings. Okay. And just I love showing this trajectory, but just to be straightforward about it, it's really important that this is not anyone's data. This is just a few examples, and this is probably the best fitting data to these types of trajectories. But not everyone's habits form this way. Some have very dramatic slopes, some flatline, some people don't form habits, and there's a lot of fluctuations around this. So real data doesn't look like any group average. And when we're starting to intervene with people in this precise way where we want to be individual and precise, we need to remember that we need to account for the fact that data is way more messy. But also, that's really important if you're just trying to change your own behavior, because some of my favorite findings in this literature are that if you fail, like if you don't do the behavior when you're in the context once, it doesn't mean that you're off your habit trajectory. You can have blips in your data and you're not going to lose your overall habit strength. So that's really exciting. And the fact that people who have more self-control, yeah, they tend to do healthier behaviors, but it's not because they're constantly using self-control to fight temptations. It's that they're setting their lives up in a way that they are able to form healthy habits. So they're making the context habit friendly for healthy behaviors. They're making what's around them easier and more efficient or more fun, that the healthy choices are there. So they're setting up their life when they're motivated so that they're not constantly having to fight temptations around them. Okay. What do we think, everybody? Anne, how are we going?
We just got a question that
Oh,
says,
great.
yes, for those of us who are behavioral scientists and encounter health tech colleagues who see some of these and simplify it to just nudge them or the fog model, could you talk about cues versus nudges and or whether a prompt is sufficient to drive motivation?
Yes, that's a big question there. Yeah, we love this is where habit research gets sticky because pop culture loves a habit message. And so and behavioral economics love a habit message, like the nudges and the behavioral architecture, where you're shifting things to make things easier. So it is part of habit, but and there's dispute amongst the field. I argue that habits only form through the enactment of a behavior in the context that has that triggering cue. Other things like nudges or cues to act can help that, but they facilitate it simply by making that more likely that you'll do that behavior in that given context. Others will argue that you can elicit a new cue. So if you put a notification on your phone, that can become a cue that then you can habitually react to. Other nudges work a bit differently because they shift the accessibility of the behavior, or they shift how often a cue is there, or they can help generalize so that it's not just habits driving your behavior, it's other influences. So the long-term answer I have is yes, they help if they do it in the consistent cue or the same context. Sometimes if you're just pushing someone to do the behavior more, you're not leaning on those processes that of habit formation, but that context consistency that's so important that makes that more automatic down the track. I'll just touch on this and then hopefully I'll give if I how are we doing? 10 minutes. Yeah, I'll go a few minutes and then if we have time for questions, I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but we'll see what people say.
We are
Okay.
allowed.
Thank you, Anne. All right. And when I was in Australia and I did my mental health intervention, first one, we stuck a web-based intervention, a generic one for physical activity on a website and recruited people with moderate and severe depression and said, hey, do this intervention. Exercise is good for you. And we asked to get feasibility and needs assessment and some reactions to this type of intervention. And this feedback I actually stopped me in my tracks to the point that I printed this out and stuck it on my wall because it made it so apparent that I was so out of touch. And you were not with the person that you're intervening with. You want me to go for a run, and I can't even get myself out of bed. This to me is so brilliantly said because what it says is you don't understand who I am and you don't understand where I am or what I'm going through. And that is the worst case scenario for when you're trying to change someone's behavior. So this quote to me speaks to tailoring. So you need to understand the audience you're intervening with. You need to do some of the co-design and community participatory research that is becoming more important and more prevalent. But also, even someone with severe depression isn't in the same cloud every minute of their day. It may be more often than other people, but they still have good days and good moments. So we need to capture not only the behavior and the context, but the dynamics and allow for the fact that people's motivations and feelings and symptoms change. And we can use that when we start thinking about how to help people form or break habits. Don't try to get them to do something when they can't. I don't want to go for a jog right now. I can't even think about getting out of bed. And I just think that's really important and constant to remind ourselves. And that's why we're going a bit more precise. And if you want to talk more about that, this is a paper that I wrote with Adrian Taylor for a special issue of mental health and physical activity. Because what I was laughing about when I started looking more at mental health outcomes is it's a huge field, mental health and physical activity. But what's happening is we're focusing just on this part. Like we love a good meta-analysis that tells us the exact effect size of what physical activity will do for depression symptoms. Or exactly how many minutes should be in our guidelines if you want to prevent depression. Great. But what that issue talks about is, yeah, but for us to have a prescription for physical activity, it is hinging on the fact that this person will do that. And they are already at a disadvantage because a lot of the time, the effort and the mental demand that it takes to be active, they are at a disadvantage because it feels harder to get themselves to do it when you're depressed. So we're doing some really exciting work now where we're shifting and looking at this reciprocal relationship between mental health symptoms and motivation for activity and some of these habit formation processes. I'm quite interested in those types of disorders and conditions and symptoms because they're a dysregulation of the same systems we are relying on to help people form long-term behavior change through habits and everything else. Um, okay, quick narrative story here. This is an AI generated picture of David Williams. I have him as a philosopher because he is an elegant writer and a wonderful, well-informed and well-read scientist. But a lot of the times he stays at that philosophical level. I had a visiting scholarship with him at Brown, and we were chatting. And it was me who has done a lot of papers in habit, and Dave who has done a lot of work with hedonic motivation. So how affective experiences like dread and urges and desires impact our health behaviors. And then we stopped talking and we said, are we talking about the same thing or not? Like, is hedonic motivation the motivation that we get when we are tempted or we have negative dread for something? Is that the same thing as a habit? And the fact that me and him were not clear on that was a concern because we knew more than most. So what we did is brought in Ryan Rhodes, who's a beautiful, practical um, operationalizer. So between the three of us, we got to write this really fun paper that was talking about the differences between hedonic motivation and habit and how they could be used together to change a person's behavior and help form habits. I won't dive into that too deep, but basically the idea is what we came to is habits are not value laden. And what we mean by that is if it's an emotional part that's driving it, that's not a habit. Habits are cue behavior, so it doesn't have anything to do with emotions and the affective experiences you're having before, during, or after the behavior. That's all hedonic motivation. They can supplement each other and they can help build, but they're separate. So just the takeaway message I have on this is a lot of times people get obsessed with just focusing on habits. And my talk has been really habit centric when we talk about behavior change. and this is that system that I've been talking about, that process, we need to remember that, yeah, there's all these other things like self-control and accessibility that influences our behavior, but also there's other automatic processes on our behavior. Habit isn't the only automatic or non-conscious influence on behavior. Hedonic motivation is as well. And what they can link together in a really rewarding way. If you do a behavior and you like it or dislike it, that can lead to an affectively driven motivational reaction that can support that habit formation perspective. But there are important, distinct impacts on behavior. And as a reminder, I'm going to skip that part. That's one of many different ways that our behavior is driven. So it's one influence on behavior. It's not the only one. I like to end these types of talks with saying general takeaways of if you want to change your habits, what's my advice? Forget monitoring your behavior, monitor your cues. So try to figure out what's going on around you and how you're feeling when you do the behavior and what are you getting out of it? What's the reward that you might have been catalyzing that habit formation process? So if you want to do something new, make it fun, rewarding, or easy. And if you want to stop something, figure out what the needs are you're feeling and what cues are around you when you're doing the behavior you don't want to be doing. That's it for me, everybody. We've covered all that. This is thanks to my family, who I've got to spend time in Europe this summer, thanks to them and what they're doing. And obviously, the work crew that helps support the practical logistics of this, our Motivation of Health Behavior Lab at USC. So thank you, everybody.
So, Amanda, I think you're a mind reader as well, because just before you started that very last part on affect and hedonic
Oh, yes, Lucas.
association, somebody asked exactly that. Lucas Carr said, "Can you talk about the role of affect and enjoyment? Do you have data on whether behaviors or cues possibly that are perceived to be more enjoyable, the individual, are easier to turn into habits?" And then he responded as you answered it. Ha, good timing.
That's great. And honestly, a lot of the work that are called habits is probably capturing hedonic motivation. So if it's value laden, if it feels like an ick or it feels like a something you're rewarding, then yeah, absolutely, it's hedonic motivation. Doesn't mean there's not also an influence from habit, but it means it's one of many parts of our behavior.
Excellent. And I think we might have time for just one more quick question.
That'd be
Sorry,
great.
I just have a frog in my throat at this very moment. So you showed habit formation curve and noted that there isn't a prototypical curve in practice. So do you have any thoughts on what influences the shape of the curve people exhibit for habit formation?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a few evidence-based ones, including the type of cues they're using and some individual differences in terms. There are actual pretty predictable indicators of if people are better at making routines, they tend to have faster gains in their habit formation. One thing that doesn't work is making a person have a goal to form a habit. Because what happens is then you're in achievement motivation. So we've done some interventions where we go, all you need to do is it for, 66 days and it'll form a habit. Well, all people are doing is just trying to get through 66 days. But that's not the, that doesn't work because then that goal is achieved and all that motivation collapses because your achievement has happened. So yes, there are features of the behavior, the person, and the context that will change that trajectory.
Wonderful. And then hopefully one last quickie. Someone, Sarah Riedel, asked if you could give a couple more examples of habit cues.
Great question. And there are people in this room that are better equipped with that answer than I am. And there, it is a contentious topic. What we talk about, I think about it is temporally, so time, routine, people you're around. Some people would debate this, but I tend to think about internal things like your mental health symptoms and your affect or your mood can be a cue or at least something that can help facilitate that cue behavior reaction. But it's really an unknown question and we're still exploring it. It seems to be the easiest when we're starting to intervene with habits is a routine or a time-based one, at least from a physical activity perspective. That's what I've seen in the literature. But we're not good at measuring, changing, or understanding cues yet.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This was a really wonderful presentation. We've got a lot of really excellent comments. Um, and I want to thank you for joining us, especially in your late time zone.
No, it's great. I'm off to a Finnish sauna now, so
Excellent. Well, that's a
what
great
a
way to
relief.
celebrate. So
Yeah, and it's
we will be sending out the webinar to
perfect.
everybody who registered. So,
Perfect. And if anyone has anything, any thoughts or ideas or questions, I'm happy to interact via LinkedIn or email.
oh, thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend.
Yes, you too, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.